In software development, a function is just a series of finite steps that accomplish some task. Let's say we have the task of creating a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. The first step would be to gather the ingredients: 2 slices of bread, peanut butter, jelly, a knife, a plate. The next step would be to spread the peanut butter on one slice and jelly on the other slice. Next, you would put the 2 slices together to create the sandwich, and finally, you would place them on the plate. Each of these steps that I've mentioned is a defined step that we take in order to complete the Make PB&J task. We call the combination of these finite steps in association with the task a function. So how do you use a function? We can use its label or the name we give the task. In our case, the task name is Make PB&J Sandwich. This means every time I want to make a PB&J, we can just use the label or the name of the function, Make PB&J Sandwich, instead of listing out every step. To use the function, we would just write the function name with some open and closed parentheses. This makes 3 peanut butter and jelly sandwiches because it executes the function code 3 times. Without functions, we would have to copy and paste all of those steps 3 times, which would be unnecessarily wordy. We want our code to be designed as we live and work in everyday life. When I tell someone to make a PB&J sandwich, I don't need to tell them all the steps. I just use the name of the task, but at some point long ago, that person learned how to make a PB&J sandwich and associated the steps with accomplishing that task. For our programs, we have to write code that defines the task, as well as all the steps needed to complete that task or make the PB&J. Once it's defined, we can use the task name to execute the function as many times as we want. Now, our functions don't have to have a bunch of steps. Let's say we wanted to create a function that prints out "It's developer tea time" whenever it's time for tea. The name or label for the function would be Announce Developer Tea Time, and for the steps, it would wait for the appropriate time and then print out "It's developer tea time." To use the function, we would just need to use the name Announce Developer Tea Time. So why use functions? Functions help developers organize their code in a meaningful way. Organizing a series of steps under a label helps us keep track of certain tasks we might want to accomplish in our program. It also helps us define a single task once so that it can be used all throughout our program. For example, once we know how to make a PB&J once, we can just use the task name to make one. Now, what if we wanted to change how to make a PB&J? Or we wanted to change how we announce developer tea time? Instead of having to change a bunch of separate lines in the code, we can just go to the function steps and modify the step we want to change. For example, if we wanted to change our announcement to "It's developer tea time, it's time for some snacks," we would just change the one print statement in the Announce Developer Tea Time steps instead of changing a bunch of lines of code. Ultimately, functions make it easier to change what our code is doing. Next, we'll create and use our first function in Java. To use a function in Java, we must first define the function. We've already seen this a little bit with the functions we mapped out in the last lesson. For the Make PB&J Sandwich function, we had to define the steps needed to accomplish the given task, make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. For Announce Developer Tea Time, we had to define the steps to announce tea time. It's important to remember that just because we are defining a function does not mean we are using it. Just because I've given you the instructions on how to make a PB&J does not mean you've made a PB&J. This means the way we write this code will be a little different than the things we've written in the past. Let's try implementing our Announce Developer Tea Time function in Java. To define the new set of steps that we want associated with our Announce Developer Tea Time function, we'll go just above the main function and write public, static, void, and then the label of our function, Announce Developer Tea Time. The name of our function is announceDeveloperTtime. Now let's follow this up with some open and close parentheses and open close curly brackets. We'll talk about the open close parentheses in a later lesson in this chapter, but we are going to put the steps for our function in between the curly brackets. These will be the lines of code that will be executed when our function is used. Thinking back to the steps we laid out before, the first step is to wait for developer ttime. So we'll write system.out.println, waiting for developer ttime. To keep this as simple as possible, we are going to make our program pause until the user types a random word and presses enter on their keyboard. There are other ways we could implement this waiting for developer ttime step, but this is the most straightforward with what we know so far. For this function, once the user types a random word and presses enter, we'll announce developer ttime. To check if the user has entered a word into the console, we'll need to create a scanner and use the .next operation, as we've done before. We won't need to reference or use the random word that the user enters, so we can write input.next and not save it to a variable. Finally, let's announce developer ttime with a print statement. Awesome! Now we have our first function. The function name is announceDeveloperTtime, and it has 5 steps, or 5 lines of code to execute. With our function defined, we can use it in our program.